possibly engage in socially distanced games of Brutal. Ari Sachs is the rabbi at the Huntington Jewish Center, and he joins us now from Huntington, New York. Rabbi, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you so much, Scott. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, sir, as I don't have to tell you, celebrations are going to be different this year. What parts of the Hanukkah story, under these circumstances, seem most worth hearing again this year?
Yeah, I think that the story of Hanukkah really has meaning for us this year. Over the course of a couple centuries, beginning with Alexander the Great's conquering of the Middle East, the Greek influence on life infiltrated the lives of the Jews who were living in the land of Israel. But there were many Jews who said, that's not who we are. We want to be able to believe in our God and to pray to our God, and to do so in the temple in Jerusalem, which was ransacked by the Greeks. They had put up their gods in place of the altar for the God of Israel. And so they gathered together, led by a great warrior named Judah, and they fought back. Judah and his followers were able to get to the temple, to reclaim it, to rededicate it, and that was not the end of the war, but that was in the midst of the war against the Greeks. The holiday of Hanukkah is not about being victorious at the very end of the day. It's about celebrating a victory in the middle of a much larger battle. Right now, we are still in the battle against COVID. I mean, thank God we have a vaccine coming, but still, there's just great fear that we're never going to be able to return to life as normal. During each of these days, in the midst of this battle against this terrible pandemic, we are able to find some element of victory, find something to hold on to give us hope for the future.
I've heard it said over the years, the miracle is not just the light lasting for 8 nights, but it's the faith of the people to light it the first night.
Yes. It takes a lot of guts to be able to light a candle and say that this candle is going to burn and represent my hope that there will be a future that I can hold on to that's going to be better, even more so than in the present.
I gather, Rabbi, too, you've done some research on Hanukkah celebrations in particularly dire times, including Auschwitz.
Yeah. This commandant of the Nazis thought it would be right to torment the people by saying, hey, Jews, guess what? Don't you know that it's Hanukkah? See, we lit candles for you. And he pointed to the crematoria that were at full blast. And then said, oh, we have a Hanukkah gift for you. And it was an extra loaf of bread and some margarine. And I think the Nazis just thought that they were going to fight tooth and nail just to get a little piece of it. But these Jews inside this concentration camp said, you know what? We're going to turn this tormenting moment of being ridiculed into the greatest miracle, which is to take the margarine and the loaf of bread and some other resources that they had available to them. And I have no idea how to do it, but they formed the bread and the margarine into candles that they could actually light in the midst of the burning crematoria that they saw by the window. The mitzvah, the commandment of Hanukkah, is to show off the candle to any passerby. You're supposed to put it in your window so that people passing by can see it and they could be informed of the miracle of Hanukkah. And these Jews in Auschwitz, they took the candle and they put it by the window so that the Nazis could see it. These Jews were scoring a victory over death.
Rabbi Sachs, what do you see when you look at a menorah and the dancing lights?
You know what's amazing? Is that when you take a step back, all of those flames that are uniquely their own, they all look like one massive, giant, single flame together. In America, in this incredibly diverse world that we live in. Hanukkah is one of many holidays of the season, and many holidays that are festivals of lights. Obviously, we have Christmas, which is an incredible festival of light. My 4-year-old daughter was in a class and had to be over Zoom because we were quarantined. One of the families, who is of Indian Hindi descent, shared the Hindi tradition of Diwali with all of us. And it was beautiful to see another festival of light. This is a time of year when all of us are searching to find light in the midst of the deepest darkness of the year. The miracle of Hanukkah is that we can all be who we need to be, independently and uniquely, and at the same time stand together as one.
Rabbi Ari Sachs of the Huntington Jewish Center, thank you so much for being with us, sir.
Thank you so much, Scott, and happy holidays to you and to your family.
You're listening to Weekend Edition from NPR News. Imagine you own some commercial real estate in your city's main business or shopping district, and say you're into a business that's having trouble paying that rent, which means you have trouble paying the mortgage. Whether you make the decision to evict or get a bank loan, what happens next has consequences for the rest of the economy. WBOR's Adrian Ma explains.
Take a walk through Boston's financial district in the middle of the day, through the canyon of glass and concrete office towers, and you're likely to hear a slightly unnerving sound. Near silence. Minus a construction crew here and there, the streets are eerily quiet.
Walking through downtown, walking through downtown, walking through downtown.
Okay, except for that. That's me singing, on my way to meet with Liz Berthollet.
Are we recording now?
Yeah, is that okay?
Yeah.
Berthollet is a researcher at Newmark, a company that buys and sells commercial real estate. And she's been working in this area for a while, so she's been able to see it change.
Downtown Boston really came into its own over the last few years. And prior to the pandemic, we had the strongest fundamentals this market really has ever seen.
Companies were moving in, vacancies were near historic lows, and rents were up. The neighborhood had a vibe.
It's the hustle and bustle. It's the people that work downtown. It's lunch meetings and, industry events and meeting up with friends that work in other companies.
Yeah, well, not so much anymore. Several months into the pandemic, vacancies are up. Many companies are moving or trying to sublet their space. And according to her estimates, downtown office buildings are only about 6% full.
So if it's about 6% now, where would it usually be?
Well, it's hard to say because we weren't really measuring that.
Because in normal times, a company buying an office building might wonder, how big is it? Or what are the amenities? Not, is anyone gonna show up? But that's exactly the question being asked. Not just by companies that own offices, but those that own restaurant, retail, and entertainment space. And even if you don't buy or sell or lease commercial real estate, there's a reason this should matter to you.
I think we probably haven't seen the worst of the bankruptcies and the business failures yet.
Joe Peak is an economist at the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston. He says the chain reaction starts like this.
So these businesses fail and they default on their loans, so now banks have a problem.
Banks see the market getting riskier, so they're a little pickier about who they lend to. He points to a recent survey by the Fed, where over 60% of loan officers said they've tightened their lending standards.
That's a lot, it seems like. I mean,
Yeah.
The last time you get that kind of spike is back in 2008.
Right, the financial crisis.
Huh.
Because, again, do I want to lend to you right now on a real estate deal? Probably not. Because I'd be afraid that you're not going to be able to make the payments.
The problem is, credit for a market is sort of like oil for an engine. You know, it sort of lubricates the economy. If commercial landlords can't get loans, they're less able to cut deals with tenants and help them get through the pandemic. That will lead to more business failures, which will make banks tighten up even more. Peake says the longer this cycle continues, the harder it'll be for the economy to get back on its feet. For NPR News, I'm Adrian Ma in Boston.
This is NPR News.
Did
challenges of 2020 are likely going to stay with us well into the new year. And while there's still much uncertainty ahead, you can be sure WNYC will continue to be here to bring you the news, analysis, and community these times require. WNYC was made for moments like these. We're here for you because you're here for WNYC. Please make a year-end charitable contribution today. Visit WNYC.org/donate or call 888-376-WNYC. And thanks.
WNYC is supported by Salesforce, providing support in today's changing world. With sales, service, and marketing all on one platform, Salesforce helps small businesses connect with customers in new ways. More at salesforce.com/SMB. WNYC's health coverage is supported by the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, bridging science and the arts by supporting books such as Virginia Postrell's The Fabric of Civilization, How Textiles Made the World. More at sloan.org.
This is Weekend Edition on WNYC. Coming up, a discussion on where athletes should be in line to get the coronavirus vaccinations, and a college coach asks whether the basketball season should continue. Plus, Andrew Bird talks about his holiday album, Hark, featuring some originals and some classics. New York City is expected to receive its first doses of the coronavirus vaccine next week. The city says it's opening a command center on Monday to monitor vaccine distribution across the 5 boroughs. It also plans to host clinics in public housing buildings and hold vaccination events at houses of worship and community centers. The very first group of vaccine recipients will include nursing home residents and staff, followed by healthcare workers. A chance of rain today, otherwise cloudy with a high around 54 degrees. Currently, cloudy skies and 48 degrees in New York City at 9:40.
Support for NPR comes from member stations and from Noom, a personalized weight loss program designed to give people knowledge to set new goals and the tools to stick to them for good. Learn more at Noom, Noom.com. And Little Passports, offering hands-on activity kits to keep kids engaged and expand their minds, designed to help kids to explore the world and unpack the mysteries of science. More at littlepassports.com.
This is WNYC 93.9 FM and AM 820, NPR News and the New York Conversation.
This is Weekend Edition from NPR News. I'm Scott Simon, and no matter the news, it's time for sports. The vaccine is here. Should athletes be considered almost essential workers and receive it earlier than some other Americans? And no less than Coach K questions playing college basketball during a pandemic. Howard Bryant of ESPN joins us. Howard, thanks so much for being with us.
Good morning, Scott. How are you?
I'm fine, thanks. Tell us about this NHL, a report that they've been trying to buy vaccines for hockey players.
Well, it was a preliminary report that suggested that if there was a vaccine that was available, that the NHL would essentially try to purchase it for their 750 players. And it was immediately sort of recorrected to say, well, no, we're not trying to skip the line. We're simply saying if it's available for private purchase, then the league would do it. I found it fascinating in some ways because this is going to be the question. The who is going to get the vaccine, who's going to be available, who it's going to be available for, and where sports fits in this once more. If we remember at the beginning of the pandemic, the question was to shut down sports completely, and then colleges, the NCAA tried to assume that the athletes were essential. And so...
Well, and there were also questions raised, how come all these athletes are getting COVID tests
exactly.
whenever they want?
Exactly. And then when baseball started, you had players like DJ LeMahieu of the Yankees saying he was tested 11 times. And the question was, well, no one else can even get tested. How are you being tested daily? And so once again, sports, the necessity of sports, on the one hand, I understand some of this logic simply because we should remember at the beginning of the pandemic that a lot of people didn't even take it seriously until the NBA shut down and then the rest of the sport shut down.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there's also this question of equity, fairness, and is this really necessary?
What about the argument I heard this week that athletes, specifically they mentioned NBA players, should notably publicly get vaccinated as soon as possible, because that will have the net effect of encouraging people to get vaccinated.
Well, once again, I understand the logic. I'm not sure I agree with it, especially when you think about the question, especially when you think about colleges as well. The idea that these players, these athletes have been treated essentially as fungible anyway, and so with all of the distrust and with all of the questions, first, on the one hand, we're going to say, well, why are they being able to skip the line? And then on the other hand, we're going to say, well, why are they being essentially sacrificed for this? So I understand the logic in some ways because people do pay attention to these athletes. They have enormous visibility. On the other hand, are we placing sports in such an important level that it's completely undeserved and sort of it's far too skewed for the importance of the conversation?
No less than Coach Mike Krzyzewski raised the question this week whether or not the college basketball season should still go on.
Also, very good question. When you look at the number of teams that aren't playing in the NFL, you look at the number of games. There are numerous teams out there in college basketball that haven't even played their first game yet. I was happy to see Coach K make that a sort of a public conversation because people seem to be very comfortable playing with these sort of figure it out as we go along rules. It's something that maybe we should pay more attention to.
ESPN's Howard Bryant. Howard, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you, Scott.
Looking for a book to curl up with just about now? I mean, you can't spend all of your time listening to the music of B.J. Liederman, who writes our theme music. NPR's Book Concierge has nearly 400 recommendations. Some of our colleagues have recommended 4 new books about current events for your reading pleasure.
I'm Eric Meggins, NPR's TV critic, and I've also done a lot of work looking at how race, media, politics, and society come together. So I was really excited to pick up this book called Me and White Supremacy by Layla Saad. Of course, since the death of George Floyd at the hands of Minneapolis police earlier this year, we've had this huge civil rights reckoning where people have asked, how do I recognize systemic racism in my world, in my community, and how do I fight it? And this book does a great job of walking readers through definitions, questions, and concepts that you need to understand to realize how racial stereotypes are embedded in American society, to take a look at how we reflexively reference these stereotypes in our own thinking, and to figure out how to dismantle them and oppose them wherever you are in whatever community you're living in.
Hi, my name is Liz Baker. I'm a producer on the National Desk. The book I'm recommending is Breath, The New Science of a Lost Art by James Nestor. It is about something that we all really take for granted, or at least I do, and never thought about, which is breathing and our respiratory system. With coronavirus being a respiratory illness, it seemed like pretty good timing for this kind of book about breath. This book takes the science that is maybe not super accessible, in medical journals or scientific articles, and it breaks it down into super accessible chunks, including techniques of what you can do, right? There's breathing really fast, there's breathing really slow, there's holding your breath, there's breathing through your nose versus breathing through your mouth, and he breaks it down showing the science and showing practically what it does to your body by doing it himself, which is both impressive and a little bit scary because some of the experiments he puts himself through sound just terrible.
I'm Greg Myrie, and I'm an NPR national security correspondent. The book I'd like to tell you about is The New Map, and it's by Daniel Yergin. Now, he's been writing in sweeping terms about global energy markets for decades. Yet this book, like his previous ones, is actually about so much more. He begins with a visit to Tiny Dish, Texas. That's the site of the first successful fracking operation back in 1998, which launched a new era that's made the U.S. the world's largest energy producer. But it's also a book about climate change. Yergin walks the reader through the battles to control the electric car market and countries that are making solar and wind power part of the mainstream. And ultimately, Yergin shows us how energy markets explain world politics. From Middle East conflicts to China's obsession with the South China Sea, he breaks them down through the lens of energy. Daniel Yergin writes about energy, but his stories are really a masterclass on how the world works.
Shireen Marisol Meraji, co-host and senior producer of NPR's Code Switch podcast. And I'm proud to say that I loved Carla Cornejo Villavicencio's book. In The Undocumented Americans, Carla writes about the Americans who never get recognized as such because of their immigration status. People who live interesting, complicated lives, but are only considered workers, laborers, if they're thought of at all. Having lived the life of an undocumented American herself, Carla weaves her story with those of other undocumented people she meets in 5 different cities across the United States. Their names have been changed, and it's possible their stories have changed a bit too. In The Undocumented Americans, Carla leaves it up to us to decide what's fact, what's fiction, and whether that even matters. Her approach to nonfiction and her writing style are innovative, electric. You will feel it all when you read this book.
There you have it. 4 books for people interested in diving deeper into current events. We heard Shireen Marisol Meraji recommending The Undocumented Americans, Greg Myrie talking about A New Map, Liz Baker, who recommended Breath, and Eric Davis recommending Me and White Supremacy. For the full list of NPR Book Concierge recommendations, check out npr.org/bizbooks. Andrew Bird began to wonder about Christmas a while ago.
Yeah, I'm writing a song about Christmas in April this year. So I'm not sure what to think about that.
And Andrew Bird's full album of holiday music is available now. Has some classics, of course, and original songs like Christmas in April that might supplement the December playlist that you might be leaning on just a little hard this year. The album is called Hark, with an exclamation point, and Andrew Bird joins us now from Los Angeles. Thanks so much for being with us.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Billboard says Christmas in April might just be the first ever COVID-inspired holiday song. How did it come about?
Well, I started writing it in March, but I thought March wasn't the most lyrical sounding word. But I was going through what a lot of us were going through, which the stages of acceptance of what we were dealing with the pandemic. And I was thinking ahead to the holidays and wondering if it was going to go on that long, and if whether we'd be able to see our families and loved ones. And also kind of realizing that probably millions of people were thinking the same thing I was, which, how often can you say that?
Said Merry Christmas and Happy New Year.
You have been making music for what, 25 years now? Almost?
Yeah.
And why did you want to do a holiday album now?
You know, I didn't think I'm gonna make a holiday album right now. I thought, man, I love these Vince Guaraldi tunes, and I want to do a couple covers. And that kind of one thing led to another, and I thought, maybe I'll write some originals. It's kind of like the ultimate challenge for a songwriter to try to write something that enters the repertoire of holiday classics.
One of the more somber songs on this album. We want to ask you about that too. Let's listen to Alabaster.
Days are growing shorter, nights are growing longer. Gotta get much stronger to make it through.
Does a holiday album have to encompass what we're going through now to work?
Not necessarily. A holiday album is in its own complete category of music. It's kind of extraordinary, really, that we have this repertoire of music that only works a certain time of year. And the ones that stand the test of time, that have been around for, some of them for centuries, they're not always the most uplifting. Sometimes they're sad and creepy, honestly. And those are the ones that kind of stick, like, you know, Green Sleeves, and, you know, they're oftentimes minor key. You know, I think of Dance at the Sugar Plum Fairies, or, you know, that sort of captures the darkness of that time of year. And Christmas, going back to the holiday festival of lights, you know, welcoming the darkness. There's this whole tradition of, like, the holidays being something that gets us through the dark, cold months.
You do a noteworthy kind of annual gig at Fourth Presbyterian Church in our hometown of Chicago on Michigan Avenue. Great, famous church. What about this year?
Well, yeah, it's become a annual tradition, and I don't play any Christmas songs at those performances, but I try to capture a sort of ambiance that captures the holiday, and again, kind of helps us get through the dark months. This year I'm doing it as a live stream in Ojai, California, amongst the orange groves. Not exactly the setting that I imagined, but it will be at sunset, and it'll be beautiful.
And that concert will be tomorrow.
It is, yeah. And I really enjoy having to stay present enough to react to the acoustics of a particular space. So Gazelle kind of captures that playing to the room idea, and how important the environment is.
What's that word again?
Gezelligheid. It's a Dutch word that the Dutch say has no translation, but roughly translates as cozy.
How are you feeling this holiday season? Mr. Bird, how are you and your family doing?
We've thankfully avoided illness and tragedy. It hasn't come too close to us so far. Anxiety has just been the word for this year. You know, I can't perform live, but capturing everyday life and how music is a part of my everyday life, I've gotten a little closer to that goal.
What is everyday music like in your life now?
Well, it's a bit more lo-fi, and sometimes it's just me late at night, fully reclined on the couch after a fairly anxious, defeating day, recording a song like White Christmas on my phone, and kind of embracing the scrappiness of that.
I'm dreaming of a white Christmas.
Andrew Bird, his latest album is Hark, with an exclamation point. A good holiday to you, sir, and thanks so much for being with us.
Happy holidays to you.
And children, listen to hear.
This is Weekend Edition from NPR News. I'm Scott Simon.
Support for NPR comes from WNYC members and from American Jewish World Service, supporting human rights advocates worldwide as they respond to COVID-19 and defend democracies. Learn more at ajws.org. And X-Chair, maker of the X2 home office chair, with dynamic variable lumbar support and 10 ergonomic adjustments, donating to Gladstone Research Institute to fight COVID-19 at xchair.com.
This is WNYC. Good morning. Weekend Edition continues on AM 820. The New Yorker Radio Hour is next on 93.9 FM. Today on the show, David Remnick speaks with two members of the House of Representatives, Ayanna Pressley and Abigail Spanberger. They talk about tensions in the Democratic Party between centrists and progressives. This week on our Sunday evening live show, the United States of Anxiety, Hear how the medical community earned the distrust of Black Americans and what it will mean when the COVID vaccine is available to the public. Host Kai Wright will be joined by Black medical professionals, and they'll take your calls and questions about this next stage of the pandemic. Tune in to the United States of Anxiety, Sunday night at 6, right after All Things Considered on WNYC. Some patchy fog until about noon today. Otherwise, it'll be cloudy with a chance of rain through the afternoon, a high around 54 degrees. Tonight, a slight chance of showers. After midnight, mostly cloudy with a low around 49. But tomorrow, partly sunny with a high near 58 degrees. Sunday night, mostly cloudy with a low around 40 degrees. It's 10 o'clock.
WNYC supporters include Genesis, a global cloud contact center software provider that connects phone, email, chat, and social. More information and self-guided tour is available at genesys.com.
This is WNYC, FM, HD, and AM New York.
When Democrats lost seats in the House in November, moderates in the party were quick to blame the left for scaring voters with terms like defund the police. Progressives like Ayanna Pressley, however, don't buy it.
I would urge us to not be bogged down in a debate about language that allows us to get distracted from the work that we must be doing to respond to the brutality, the lynching, the surveying, the profiling, and the murders of unarmed Black Americans for generations. If you really believe that Black lives matter, the only receipts that matter right now are policies and budgets.
Today on the New Yorker Radio Hour, I'll talk with Ayanna Pressley and also with Abigail Spanberger, a centrist Democrat who sees the issue quite differently. That's the New Yorker Radio Hour just ahead.
Live from NPR News, I'm Giles Snyder. Food and Drug Commissioner Dr. Stephen Hahn is responding to published reports that the White House pressured him to ensure that the FDA authorized the emergency use of Pfizer's coronavirus vaccine by the end of the day Friday, or face being forced to resign.
Science and data guided the FDA's decision. We worked quickly based on the urgency of this pandemic, not because of any other external pressure.
At a press conference this morning, Dr. Hahn said the rapid development of Pfizer's vaccine does not mean that important safety checks were ignored. The FDA last night announced that it has granted emergency use authorization to the vaccine developed in conjunction with Pfizer's German partner. NPR's Joe Palca has more.
And emergency use authorization means the COVID-19 vaccine made by Pfizer and BioNTech can be distributed to the public. For the time being, at least, supplies of the vaccine will be limited. To get full protection, people need to get 2 shots of the vaccine spaced 21 days apart. A large study of some 44,000 people showed the vaccine was more than 90% effective in preventing COVID-19 illness. Many people in the study experienced side effects such as pain at the injection site and fatigue, chills, and fever, but these were not typically severe and only lasted a day or so. A similar vaccine made by Moderna could also get authorization in a week or so. Joe Palca, NPR News.
Pfizer's vaccine is being readied for distribution amid a surge in coronavirus infections. In California, a record number of people tested positive Thursday. Scott Rod is with member station Cap Radio in Sacramento. He reports this comes as the state remains under a stay-at-home order.
More than 35,000 Californians tested positive for COVID-19 in a single day. That's more than double the single-day peak during the state's summer coronavirus surge. Meanwhile, the number of available intensive care unit beds continues to drop. Hospitals across most of the state have less than 15% available ICU capacity.
The U.S. Supreme Court last night shot down President Trump's effort to block Joe Biden's election as president. In a 3-sentence order, the justices said they would not consider a lawsuit filed by the state of Texas and supported by the president that sought to invalidate election results in 4 key states. Here's NPR's Nina Totenberg.
For the last couple of days, Trump has been promoting the Texas lawsuit as the big one. But just hours after the last briefs were filed in the case, it fizzled, with the justices saying that Texas has no legal standing to complain about the way other states have conducted, counted, recounted, and certified their elections. So, barring any last-minute maneuvers, on Monday, the Electoral College delegates will cast their votes, and Biden will be formally the president-elect. Nina Totenberg, NPR News, Washington.
This is NPR News.
This is WNYC in New York. I'm Yasmin Khan. Starting Monday, New York City restaurants and bars will no longer be allowed to serve patrons indoors. Outdoor dining and takeout will still be allowed. Governor Andrew Cuomo says he knows the decision is a painful one.
Federal government must provide relief to these bars and restaurants in this next package. I understand battling COVID. I also understand you're wiping out businesses.
Hospitalizations for COVID in New York City are climbing. For the first time since the spring, the number of new hospitalizations surpassed 200. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention have described indoor dining as particularly high risk. Mayor de Blasio says many factors have contributed to this year's gun violence, which is approaching its highest level in 14 years. Police officials continue to blame the trend on recidivism caused by bail reforms, but when asked if the city has any new data to support that, de Blasio gave no specifics. He referred to the pandemic's toll on society and a slowdown in court operations.
There's lots of data showing each of these pieces has had an impact.
He spoke on the Brian Lehrer Show. Criminal justice reform advocates say there's no data linking gun arrests directly to bail reform. Early voting begins today for the special election in the 12th Council District in the Bronx. The election will fill the seat of former City Council member Andy King, who was expelled over ethics violations. Early voting runs through Sunday, December 20th. Check poll site hours online at vote.nyc. Election day is Tuesday, December 22nd. It's 10:06.
Support for NPR comes from Total Wine & More, where in-store teams can recommend a bottle of wine, spirit, or beer for the holidays. Shoppers can explore more than 8,000 wines, 2,500 beers, and 3,000 spirits. More at TotalWine.com.
This is the New Yorker Radio Hour, a co-production of WNYC Studios and the New Yorker.
Welcome to the New Yorker Radio Hour. I'm David Remnick. In his campaign for the presidency, Joe Biden played up his long career as a centrist, a champion of bipartisanship. At the same time, he advanced an agenda that, on paper anyway, was in many ways more progressive than Barack Obama's. It was not an easy balancing act at all, but Biden managed to unite the Democratic Party and beat Donald Trump. But while the Democrats won back the White House, the Democrats also lost a dozen seats in the House of Representatives. Centrists in the party were quick to lay the blame on progressives. Terms like democratic socialism and defunding the police, they said, had scared away moderate voters. Progressives, on the other hand, say that the energy that they brought to the campaign is exactly what pushed Donald Trump out of the White House. So today I'm going to talk to two members of Congress who are on opposing sides of this debate. Ayanna Pressley, who represents a district in the Boston area, and Abigail Spanberger, who was just re-elected in Virginia. When Spanberger won in 2018, it was the first time a Democrat had taken her district, the Virginia 7th, in decades. So let's begin at the beginning.
Absolutely.
You had a conference call with the Democratic caucus, and you were not happy. You were not happy with the use of the word socialism, democratic or otherwise, and certainly not happy with the term defund the police because you were convinced that it made your political life perilous and the political lives of a lot of members perilous and may have hurt the Democratic Party this time around. A lot of people disagree with you. Make your case.
I'm a Democrat because I believe in our policies. And I'm a Democrat because in the face of calls for change across our country, because of real challenges facing people, because of the death of Breonna Taylor, because of the death of George Floyd, we in the House of Representatives put together a bill that is frankly the compilation of things that my colleagues have been working on for years,